block is called Anita's Arrowhead. I really like how this block goes together. It's kind of fun to do. The block and the method to make it was designed by Anita Grossman Solomon. There's a link to her pattern in the description below the video. That pattern was published in Quiltmaker magazine, and it includes two sizes, a twin size and a queen size. And also in the link below the video, you can download a sheet she made up of 7 different sizes to make, 7 different finished sizes of this block. So let's get started now. It's a good idea to starch all of your fabrics before you cut, because you're going to be cutting on some bias edges and sewing on bias edges. The starch helps the finger pressing get a nice little crisp edge when if you're finger pressing, but I always like to starch anyway, so it wasn't anything different for me. We're going to put 2 pieces of fabric together, right sides together, and these have been starched. I've used some of my leftover layer cakes, so they're 10 inches. We want to start off with at least an 8.5 inch square, and we're going to trim them down once they're put together. That way everything stays together and each block is cut at the same time. So these are 10 inch squares, and I'm going to cut this down to 8 inches. So I'm just using a square up ruler and going close to the 8 inches, but not totally the 8 inches yet, because I'm going to trim off these 2 pieces first, these 2 sides. Now here are the trimmed sides, and I'm going to take this corner and rotate it to this side here. And I'm going to line it up on the grid, and in the next step you'll see why we do this. Then I'm going to put the 8 inches here, the 2 8-inch marks here, and trim it down to 8 inches, 8-inch square. And when you stitch these 2 together, you need to start 2 inches down from this side and 2 inches up from this side. So since we already have it on the grid here, I'm just going to come down 2 inches and just mark my 2 inch mark here, and then come up 2 inches and mark my 2 inch mark here. So you see this, here's the 2 inch mark. This means we're going to start stitching here and go down. I go ahead and put 2 pins in here because I usually cut a stack of these and then take them to the sewing machine, so this keeps them together. Now what I'm going to do next is start at this point here, stitch all the way down, and I stitch off the edge. You can stop a 1/4 inch and then turn, but you're going to stitch down this side and across the bottom. And what I do, I just stitch down here, I raise my presser foot, I turn it, and then just start on the end again and go this way. Then you're going to do the same thing, turn it around, and stitch this side and the top. Here you see I've started at this marking here, stitched all the way down and stitched off, then I stitched across and then cut the threads here. Next I stitched this side all the way this way and then all the way across and cut the threads. Next we're going to cut the piece apart. We're going to look at the 2 corners that have the stitching. So there's stitching in this corner and stitching in this corner, and this diagonal line we're going to cut. Now we're going to take this piece, rotate it around. You see they're identical now. The markings are in the same place, and we're going to stack them on top of each other. Line up these edges. Then we're going to cut 2 inches off of this side. And lift up the ruler, and now we're going to cut 2 inches off of this side. Here are the pieces we end up with. We have 4 triangles, 2 of each fabric. Then we have these 2 small pieces. We're going to turn these into a 4 patch. So I finger press these to the dark side. And these will be sewn into a 4 patch like this. Here's the 4 patch, and I just finger press it in one direction. Now we have 4 of these chisel pieces that look like this. And we're going to take one of those and sew it on one side of the 4 patch. But we want to make sure that the fabrics are alternating. So I look here, and I look at this one, and this fabric is pressed towards the dark fabric. So I'm going to finger press this towards the dark fabric and sew that onto there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So here's how this goes. This is also pressed toward the dark fabric. So I'm going to finger press toward the dark fabric and then stitch these on here. When these are sewn together, I finger press these toward the outside, toward the larger piece. So we'll put this to the side right now. We're going to take the other 2 pieces, the other 2 sort of chisel units, and then we're going to stitch these like this. You're alternating the fabric colors, and you're making this V shaped. And do the same thing with this one. Now we have our 2 wing or triangle shapes, and we're going to stitch them on either side of this one. I wanted to show you something. When you stitch these together, these ends are not going to match. You see how none of these edges match, so I just stitch off of it, just like that. It'll be the same on this side too. Okay? Now, since I'm such a stickler about pressing, I will stitch this one onto this side, and I'll see which direction the pressing is and stitch and finger press this opposite. So I'm just going to press that this way, and then this way. So now those seams will nest really nice, and do the same thing on this side. Here we have the 2 triangles sewn together, and these edges here do not match as well. So just stitch off the sides like you did before. This edge, and then this edge. And for this one, I finger press toward the corner. So you have your block is finished now, except for the trimming. So I take it now and give it a really good press, and then we're going to trim it. Well, you might notice that this is a different block than we've been working on. I just did a brilliant demo of how to trim that block, but I forgot to turn the record button on. But anyway, here's the block trimmed, but you didn't get to see that. So now you'll get to see this block trimmed. We're going to trim this block down to 9 inches. And to do that, we're going to look at our square up ruler, or any ruler you have, and we're going to take this center point right here. We want that to be 4.5 inches in either direction out to the edge. So we're going to put the 4.5 inch mark here, and that's the 4.5 inch mark. And then there's a diagonal line on this ruler, and we've lined that up with the seam line that goes across this diagonal. We're going to trim these 2. And you'll see that this part of the triangle, there's very little to trim off, and that's going to be true of all 4 of these triangles. Oops. Okay, so there's those 2. Going to flip it around and do the same thing. Put the 4.5 mark in the center, and then line up the diagonal line. And as another check, you can check your 9 inch lines here on the left and the bottom. So once everything's lined up, then go ahead and trim it up. Okay, and there is your block. Now, What you're going to do next, once you finish all of your blocks, you're going to lay them out. And what I like to do, if you look at these two blocks, I'd like to alternate the light and dark. So if you look here, these are two light pieces. These are darks and these are lights. If you notice the 4 patch here in the middle, the dark squares are on point horizontally. The same thing with this, on point horizontally. If we take one of these blocks and we rotate it 1/4 of a turn, you'll see that we have the dark next to the light on each one. And you'll also notice that the squares in the 4 patch are now on point. So as a check when you're laying out your blocks, if you want to do it this way, you could do your darks next to your darks and your lights next to your lights. But this would be a check. So if you have horizontal and vertical, that gives you your check. And for the twin sized, you're going to put 8 blocks across and you'll have 10 rows of 8 blocks. Thank you for watching.